Hey drummers, Gary Williams, your drum set mastermind and creator of the Drumset Artistry Mastermind Group. I hope you're doing well today. This is Method Books for Drummers, Part 4. This is another stack of books that I've been through, so I wanted to share some information about that. I don't have this top 3 books, so I just printed out the cover. One time I had them and I think I loaned them to a student and they never came home. So this is a book, probably my first book in high school was Realistic Rock. When I was just getting into learning how to coordinate some basic rock beats. This book was very cool. Really cool sounding exercises. It's been updated quite a lot, and then there's CD accompaniment with the newer version, but it's still one of the classic books in the rock and roll inventory, and I guess one of the best-selling books still to this date. So classic Carmine Appice book, Realistic Rock. This is a book I went through probably early college, and I also taught a lot out of this book. I had a private teacher who recommended this, A Funky Primer for the Rock Drummer by Charles Dowd. Charles Dowd is a professor of percussion down in Oregon at a university, and it just has a lot of nice different kinds of rock beat patterns, quite a few 8th and 16th note patterns, and then toward the end of the book, I think there might be some triplety patterns, but this was a really fun book. It just really kind of worked on, again, rock and roll style coordination, mostly 3-limb independence, hi-hat, bass drum, and snare. But a really great book, and I used it for quite a long time. And I don't use it anymore, but it's a good one. And then this book here, Advanced Funk Studies by Rhtyhm, Creative Patterns for the Advanced Drummer in the Styles of Today's Leading Funk Drummers. Now, what was so amazing about this book, and I highly recommend this book, if you would like to learn more about funk drumming and you would like an introduction, one of the things about this book, and why I'm recommending, is that there was actually patterns in there. When I played them, I sounded like, wow, I sound like a funk drummer. Because as I was getting into moving out of just more rock and progressive rock into more funk and R&B style, I was not as familiar with the kinds of syncopated placements of the snare and bass and the different kinds of hi-hat patterns. So he's got all these great little exercises in here with just 2-limb coordination, and then you add a 3rd limb, some dynamics. He actually has some really great transcriptions of some famous funk grooves from some recordings by James Brown, Tower of Power, and others. And of course, in today's, you got some CDs included, but really, really cool book. I really love this book, and it really helped me get inside the mind of funk drummers, and then recommended some recordings so I could kind of expand from there. So here's another book I went through. This one's written by Joe Porcaro, who was Jeff Porcaro's father. Odd Times, A New Approach to Latin Jazz Rock Applied to the Drum Set. Now, this is a really kind of a mental headspace book. And so when I went through it, it was a lot of just counting. There were some syncopated rhythms based on triplets. But it was kind of in depth. And I went up to this point here. I put a little mark in here. And I don't think I went through this whole book, or did I? Yeah, here's another one. Yep. Yeah, I would treat method books like books that you would read. If you were in a course in college or high school and you'd be signed textbooks for a class, and then who knows how many books you've ended up reading by the time you graduate from high school, let alone college. So I just went from one drum set book to another. I would work on them and I would just go through them like reading a novel. So that was kind of cool. I don't know that it really did a lot because, again, it was very cerebral. There was no recording with it, and it didn't really help me necessarily feel odd meters. It was a lot of just intellectual stuff. Kind of neat in that respect and some coordination, but for the most part, I don't feel I got tons out of that necessarily. Now, this is part 1 of the drum set with Afro-Caribbean rhythms by Chuck Silverman. Now, Chuck Silverman was an author that I discovered who wrote articles for Rhythm magazine that I subscribed to back in the late 80s, early 90s. And I would just, along with Modern Drummer, I would read these from cover to cover, looking at all the educational articles, the transcriptions. But in Rhythm magazine, this guy, Chuck Silverman, was writing a column on Latin beats. And I remember at that time really getting into some Dave Weckl playing and this Michelle Camillo album with the Songo groove. And I transcribed it, and then I opened up the Rhythm magazine, and Chuck Silverman said, today we're going to talk about the Songo. And when I saw the rhythm, it was exactly what I transcribed. So I was just hooked on this guy. And I had a private lesson with him, and these are his first original copies. I don't know where part 2 is. I have part 1 and part 3, but I went through all 3 of these. And he really just kind of helped me understand more about these different rhythms, cha-cha, bolero, mambo, merengue, and then the clave, and just, God, he had some really cool stuff. And this really started to help demystify a lot of things about Latin rhythms through these different kinds of patterns in here. I kept hearing about mambos and cha-chas and boleros and merengues and Afro-Cuban 6/8 and salsas, and oh man, there's so many different rhythms. So he went through all these things. So it was very cool. So I got these books and started going through them. I believe part 2, even though they're all called the drum set with Afro-Caribbean rhythms, part 2, if I recall, focused more on actually some bossa novas, some Brazilian rhythms, which was kind of cool. And then this one, the Afro-Caribbean rhythms part 3, has a more focus on the 6/8 patterns, the bembe or naningo. There's some different names for this. Lots of really cool stuff, and just, man, the coordination that goes into playing all these. Mozambique, which is, of course, famous by Steve Gadd, so he had some different Mozambique patterns. Reversing the clave, just lots of amazing stuff. So all 3 of these books did a ton for helping me really get a handle on clave and different styles, differentiating between Brazilian Latin rhythms versus Afro-Cuban Latin rhythms. So it goes on. Here's another very cool book that had an accompaniment CD, and I also got a DVD, I guess at the time it was a VCR, with Harlan Riley, one of the authors, New Orleans Jazz and Second Line Drumming. For all of those that have heard the term second line drumming and you're really not sure what that means, they go into that. I'm going to not really go too much into that today, but this was just really cool and very nice recordings. Lots of great information, some good photographs, some historical stuff, transcriptions of some of the stuff they were doing, so you can get the kind of feel, the brass bands. God, there's so much information. So eventually I made my way through most of this stuff. It took a while, of course, because I was still kind of adapting a flavor for some of this music. So I was studying some of it more than I was loving it, but eventually I started to really admire and in many cases fall in love with it. So Poinciana, that's just a classic Latin-y kind of groove, sort of. Anyway, lots of great stuff in here. And of course the VCR tape was very, very, very beneficial, because you really need to hear this. Like, it's a language and you cannot read it because there's a certain feel. So this somewhat helped. It was stuff later by Stanton Moore and Johnny Vidakovich that really got me into second line playing more. Okay, Ed Thigpen, The Sound of Brushes. So he was like one of the first guys besides Philly Joe Jones to write a book on brushes. And this is way back, you can see. And he goes through different kinds of brushes, different grips, different sweeping movements, different patterns. This is very similar to the Philly Joe Jones book, where they would just draw these out and then you would just try to follow the arrows. And so I made a few notes to make sure I could understand how to get these movements into my body. I really have had this deep romance with brushes and have gone through extensive amount of stuff with brushes. So starting with this book, and then I listened to the recordings and sometimes would play along with them. And then this is from when I started studying with Jeff Hamilton, like one of the world's premier brush players, and learned most all of his stuff. So it started with Ed, very cool stuff, lots of different patterns in there. Really nice information, found that very beneficial. Time Awareness for All Musicians by Peter Erskine. This is a fantastic, mostly a head talk book. There are some exercises in here for sure. And he actually has some recordings where I think things are quantized with some kind of a sequencer where he's making sure all the subdivisions are precisely on. But what's really kind of cool is that he demonstrates an example of him playing with a saxophone player that wanted to take a drum lesson, or a lesson with Peter Erskine, famous drummer, to get his feedback on his saxophone playing. This happens when you get to more of an advanced professional level. Drummers will take lessons with bass players, and bass players will take lessons with drummers just to get their feedback. But he had this guy come and they started playing together and jamming, and he played a recording. The guy was burning. So then they played this ballad, and then he went through it again, and then they superimposed a click over it after the guy recorded, so you could hear how he was thinking less about time and more about everything else. So this whole book is more about helping people really develop a sense of good, solid time awareness for all musicians. Here's yet another Peter Erskine book. I love this guy's writing. This one's fantastic. So over 500 drum fills in a variety of styles and ensembles. So essential drum fills, Peter Erskine. So it starts out with a lot of swing stuff, and then it gets into some more kind of rock and funk stuff, and just I mean, look at all this, over 500. I didn't go through the whole book, that's for sure. I mostly got it to inspire some of my students to have some ideas for fills and have dabbled in it, but not really ingested it. One of the things that I did do a lot of is I'd always take the audio recordings, the disc enclosed, and put it in my car player and listen to them quite a lot. So I would actually gain a lot of the sound of the exercises, and at this point in my playing, I don't have to see them. In fact, it's a lot faster if I can hear them than have to read them in some instances. Anyways, fantastic book to give you lots of different fills. Again, just listening to the CD and then later going into the exercises right there. That will give you a lot of sounds. This is a book I started using when I was teaching more big band stuff, Chart Reading Workbook for Drummers by Bobby Gabrielle. Fantastic book, really. I really enjoyed this. I learned quite a bit from this. It was a big inspiration for my book that I have, Drummer's Guide to Big Band, with some setups, some nice ideas in here, some good concepts, and then some charts in here that you can play along with. And, you know, spent some time going through this with students to try to help them understand big band reading. It's still a pretty darn good book. It just kind of stays with sticks and mostly charts, and there's some other things, certainly with my book, Drummer's Guide to Big Bands, quite a bit more information, and there's all these DVD tracks and so on. So anyways, that's a cool one. Advanced Method, Rubank. Now, I never went through this book, but the reason I pulled it out is because this was the book that I particularly went through the rudiments. So when I was in high school, when I was a sophomore, I began my journey on committing to doing all of the 26 standard American drum rudiments every day, and then I did a sheet of Swiss rudiments. So you're seeing here kind of what was laid out, the different rudiments. Kind of cool. So this is what I used, and every day I went through all these rudiments, and then I started going through these Swiss rudiments. This sheet's so faded you can't really see it. It looks like there's 10 of them. And what ended up happening is the 10 Swiss rudiments were combined with the 26 standard American rudiments. There was a few more things added to it, and now we have the 40 Percussive Art Society International Drum Rudiments. Pretty cool. This book, Podemski's Standard Snare Drum Method. You can see this one's old. I went through this book as a freshman in college with a private teacher, and you had to complete the whole book. And I did, and it was really cool, but I realized when I was looking at this recently, I don't know if I knew for sure that I was playing everything right had it not been for my teacher sometimes playing things for me. So this was before I really sat down and really tried to write out counting in very advanced ways so I could really speak the language of rhythm. But I remember going through this whole book on snare drum. So a classic book. Portraits in Rhythm by Anthony Cerrone. My teacher at the time recommended I bind the books, so that's why you see this plastic binding. What an amazing text. These are all very advanced. You can see the black ink all over the place. So much stuff. This is used a lot in college percussion, where you go through these etudes. It's a very common book used as a percussion performance major. And I've gone through quite a few of these, not every one of them. I recommend now the Anthony Cerrone Portraits in Rhythm Study Guide. And what it is it's a series of articles he wrote in Modern Drummer magazine for each etude. And it really helps you understand what his point is and how to do things. And I actually took 4 pages of this book. Maybe this was one of them. It's circled. And I photocopied it and wrote in the counting over every single measure. And that's when I really figured out how to count every single rhythm. So this was an amazing book to get that going. So when I went back to get a master's degree, this was the book that my professor started showing me. It's a classic book, but I had missed it in high school. But it's just all this really great rudimental stuff. I used to use the NARD book, National Association of Rudimental Drummers. I won't be showing you that, but that was all hand notated. What's nice about this one is that it was actually done with computers, and it writes in the sticking, and it gives you a list of all the rudiments that are used in each solo. So if you work on these rudiments and make sure you can play them individually, then you'll be able to play them in context. So still to this day, a fantastic book, more old school marching band, drum corps. You can see the photo, classic old suspended snare. This is a great book, still used as a favorite by many college professors. I got a lot of junk in here. Let's see what we got. But this one has all these old kind of swing era solos, and it gives you a bunch of rudiments to practice. Very good, but the real sweet part, besides all these cool rudiments and some of them in different rhythms, is all these solos. Paradiddle Johnny, Rhythmania, and Steve Smith's been posting some of his versions of this and on YouTube, and swing and accents, really kind of rudiments in a swing approach instead of more of a military approach. So that's what's cool about this book. This is an amazing book. This book by Dom, It's Your Move, Motions and Emotions, demystified the whole Moeller system. It's incredible how much I really got out of this book. I went through this book, Dom sent it to me, and then I just started going through and underlying things, and then I would highlight things, and then I went back and I read it again, and then I broke things down, and I just sort of paraphrased everything into a system that I have developed called Get a Grip, the strokes and motions of drumming in 3D. So, but this was really cool. I didn't do a lot of the drum kit stuff, mostly the hand stuff. I've already been through all these other drum set books, so that part wasn't quite as valuable to me as all this amazing stuff in the front. So that's what's cool about that book. And then the last book I'll talk about is this book that I've been using for years, which is just basically about counting rhythms. And there's 17 lessons, and it starts out simple, gets into eighths, gets into fancier combinations of sixteenths, dotted notes, got ties, triplets, and eighths and sixteenths. And I tell students when they get the book that by the time they get done with this book, they will actually be able to count these rhythms out loud. So there you go. This is an amazing book. So hope you like that. Just gives you a sample of the amount of information that I've studied and the wealth of information that I have to offer you. So if you're interested in lessons, there's a whole lot I can share with you. So until then, I'll see you next time. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye. Okay. Stop the video.